so high-tech.
Hey, George. Hi, George.
You gotta put the banana down and go this way. And I have more
Good morning.
Morning.
Well, it is nice to be with you all on this Sunday morning, whether you're a longtime friend or member or visitor or someone who likes to pop in every now and then. It's always nice to gather together and just spend this time we have this morning in fellowship with one another. I apologize if I don't seem as energetic as I usually do. I woke up this morning not feeling 100%, so if I seem a little more chill than usual, that's the reason why. But as we come together and as we have a chance to worship this morning, let's begin by centering our hearts using the words of call to worship found. We recount the gracious deeds of God, all the praiseworthy acts of the Lord has done for us.
Praise God for coming to dwell among us, Emmanuel.
Praise God for the good news of Jesus, the pioneer of our salvation.
Praise God for making us a family in Christ.
Praise God who is present with us still, lifting us up and carrying us.
God's glory shines in heaven and on earth. Praise the Lord.
Our first hymn this morning is going to be hymn number 40, which is A Joy to the World. So I invite you to stand if you are able. Friends, Jesus became like us in every regard, so that he might be a merciful and a faithful high priest in the service of God. As we confess our sins, we come before the one who is also trusted and by what he suffered, and confident that he too is able to help us. Would you please pray with me using the words of the prayer to confession found in the bulletin? Merciful God, in great love, you have claimed us as your children. We confess that we have not loved you as we should. We have not loved our neighbors as you intended. Complacent in the presence of injustice and violence, we fail to recognize our own complicity. Forgive our misuse of power against people and against creation. Help us to protect and stand up for those who are vulnerable. Do not be ashamed of us, we pray, but strengthen us in our time of testing. We pray in the name of Jesus Christ, who shared our flesh and blood. Amen. Friends, hear the good news of the gospel. That as Christ came into the world, he came into a world that was full of brokenness, full of sin and darkness, full of death and destruction. And when Christ came into the world as a lowly infant, an infant that had no power, no armies, Christ still brought hope into the world. So even when it feels as though we have no light to shine a path for us in the darkness, know that Christ is there providing a light for you. And in the times that we trip or that we stumble, that Christ is also there with arms that are outstretched to help pick us up. Friends, believe the good news of the gospel.
In Jesus Christ, you are forgiven.
Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. You may be seated. I'm going to say that you can stay where you are right now, so I don't spread whatever I might have. Even though I promised I have the Germix in my hands constantly all day so far. But I thought I would share sort of this message this morning because it'll come up again in the sermon, but for those who might be going off to Sunday school today, I thought I would share it anyway. Have you ever seen a stone before in the water? Perhaps have you ever walked by a fountain and you've seen a stone that was lying there in the water? It doesn't have to be a fountain, it could be the ocean, like whatever. I mean, you can use your creativity. Thank you, Bob. Yeah, and so when you see the water and you pick it up out of the water there where it's, you can tell that it's been wet compared to a dry stone. What do you think happens, though, if you were to crack that rock open?
It's dry.
Yeah, it's dry inside. And that's something that's interesting because it's based off of that sort of illustration comes from a movie that I watched with my family this past week. And they talked about how you can have a stone in the water for so many years, and you would think, that perhaps the water might have penetrated the rock and made it wet inside, but when you crack it open, it's still dry. And sometimes I think about that in regards to our own life, our own experiences. Because we come to church on Sunday, we've heard messages about love and salvation. But I guess the question for us this rest of this Christmas season is whether those messages about love and about how we treat one another have really seeped into our own hearts. So just something maybe a little too deep and metaphorical this morning, but something for you to ponder for the rest of the day. And so I do believe, Kathy, did you send me a message? Okay, so I do believe that there is Sunday school this morning for those who are going. I'd like to invite Robert up now to help lead us in our first reading this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Please join me in the prayer of illumination. Holy Lord,
Your word comes to us. Jesus Christ, Emmanuel. Hear and make you dream your dreams and faithfully follow wherever you lead. In your triune name we pray, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen.
Today's first reading be from Isaiah chapter 63, verses 7 through 9. God's mercy. I will recount the gracious deeds of the Lord, the praiseworthy acts of the Lord, because of all that the Lord has done for us, and the great favor to the house of Israel that he has shown to them according to his mercy, according to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he said, surely they are my people, children who will not deal falsely. And he became their Savior in all their distress. There was no messenger or angel, but his presence that saved them. In his love and in his pity he redeemed them. He lifted them up and carried them all the days of the old. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
You might have noticed our lovely choir and our lovely organist have off today, and so I was thinking about what I might do for a song, and I sang this song at the early Christmas Eve service. But it's one that I think is still very applicable for us this morning, not only because of the scripture reading, but also because as we have some time also to acknowledge the tragedy that happens not too far away from us here in Rockland County, where a man a suspect went into the home of a rabbi and stabbed people. It's hard. And so this song here is hopefully a reminder for us this morning of the power of what we can do. We all pull together.
They said no room, they said move on. They turned you away. We've been there too, felt that alone. Been hurt that way. Your light came shining into this bright night, bringing hope, bringing healing. Your love revealing. Your light came shining into this bright night to say it's okay. There's room for all of us here.
Our second scripture reading this morning comes to us from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 2, verses 13 to 23. Hear now the word of the Lord. And after the scholars were gone, God's angel showed up again in Joseph's dream and commanded, "Get up, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt. Stay until further notice, for Herod is on the hunt for this child and wants to kill him." Joseph obeyed. He got up, took the child and his mother under the cover of darkness. They were out of town and well on their way by daylight. And they lived in Egypt until Herod's death. This Egyptian exile fulfilled what Hosea had preached. "I called my son out of Egypt." Herod, when he realized that the scholars had tricked him, flew into a rage. He commanded the murder of every little boy 2 years old and under who lived in Bethlehem and its surrounding hills. He determined that age from the information he'd gotten from the scholars. That's when Jeremiah's sermon was fulfilled. A sound was heard in Ramah, weeping and much lament. Rachel weeping for her children, Rachel refusing all solace, for her children are gone, dead and buried. Later, when Herod died, God's angel appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. "Up, take the child and his mother and return to Israel. All those out to murder the child are dead." And Joseph obeyed. He got up, took the child and his mother, and re-entered Israel. When he heard, though, that Archelaus had succeeded his father Herod as king in Judea, he was afraid to go there. But then Joseph was directed in a dream once again to go to the hills of Galilee. On arrival, he settled in the village of Nazareth. This move was a fulfillment of the prophetic words, "He shall be called a Nazarene." Let us pray. Almighty God, we ask that on this day, as we gather together with our hearts that are full of many things, we ask that your Spirit may come and dwell among us, and that it may enter and bring peace, that it bring clarity, that it offer us eyes to see the new way forward that you have given us, a way that has been paved by love, compassion, mercy, and justice that go beyond all human understanding. And we ask that as we meditate upon your holy word, that that Spirit may illumine a new way for us. We ask this in your most precious name. Amen. A child has been born, a hope for all the nations, for all people, and God made flesh has come and formed the helpless infant. But only a few days after celebrating the Christ child's birth, we find that things aren't as peaceful as we would have thought. After the Magi or the scholars left, King Herod was thrown into a fit of rage. He couldn't imagine losing his power and his authority, so he called for his generals and ordered the unthinkable. Yet an angel appeared to Joseph in a dream and told him to take Mary and the Christ child to the land of Egypt, so that the prophecy of Hosea might be fulfilled. How is it that we move so quickly from the birth of Christ to a picture of a family on the run, and flees to a far-off country in search of refuge? Perhaps there's a couple things I'd like us to focus on this morning. Number one thing being, what's Herod's deal? And the second point is, what happened to Mary and Joseph and Jesus while they were in Egypt? Well, let's start first with King Herod, because what drives such a man like Herod to commit acts of murder, acts of bloodshed against his own people? Because Herod must have been afraid of something, and that is where I imagine Herod began to lose sight of what was really important. Because Herod wasn't concerned with whether or not he was on the right path, the path that God had laid out. Herod had become so preoccupied with making sure that his own power, that his own authority was secure. And when a monarch, when any other kind of ruler feels like their authority is being threatened, well, history has proven that then they show them their true selves. Something still isn't right, though, because Herod is supposed to be a king who has a deep relationship with God. Yet it seems like even though Herod was surrounded by a religious people, a religion, rabbis, and teachings about who God really was, it didn't seem like anything really sunk in. And this is where my allusion to the movie The Godfather comes into play. It's not the classic scene about taking the cannoli, but there's a very powerful scene in part 3 of The Godfather where Michael Corleone meets with Cardinal Lamberto. The two of them walk by some stone pillars where Michael explains an impending scandal that is about to take place at the Vatican. Of course, Cardinal Lamberto, in the movie, then becomes Pope John Paul I, laments over what has happened, and then reaches for a stone. He tells Michael, look at this stone, it's been here for a very long time, but the water has not penetrated it. Cardinal Lamberto then whacks the stone on the side of the fountain, breaking it open and saying, look, perfectly dry. The cardinal then tells Michael that the same is true about God. That God has surrounded people with a message of love, a message that has so many meanings, but the message has not seeped in. God doesn't live within it. Of course, Cardinal Lamberto isn't giving Michael Corleone a lesson about theology and history, because in truth, the cardinal's been talking about Michael this whole time. And this is where the movie The Godfather intersects with our reading for this morning. Because the evocative image of a dry stone that has been submerged in water for many years is what we find this morning when we talk about King Herod and when we look at a family that has been on the run. It speaks to us and asks the question, how can a stone that has been submerged for so many years still be dry on the inside? The truth of the matter is that if God's love surrounds us, if God's love truly surrounds us, and that message about peace, reconciliation, and justice surrounds us, but it hasn't changed how we live our lives, then something's wrong. And something in our lives then has to change. It's a moment of revelation when Cardinal Lamberto cracks the rock to reveal that it's dry on the inside. It's a shocking revelation because that means we can be surrounded by God's teaching of love, hope, peace, and joy that we celebrated this past Advent, and we can bathe ourselves in making us feel good about that, but that doesn't mean any of those things have made their way into the core of our very being. Because if we do things out of blind loyalty, if we do things out of fear, if we do things out of anger, then we've just been living lives that have been coded in those things. We haven't then lived lives that have allowed them to seep in and change us. And this is what Herod, what we ourselves wrestle with when things don't go our way, when we are confronted with fears. Perhaps it's all the more important then for people like ourselves to speak out kindly, to offer a kind word, a reminder of what really matters, when we see such acts of unbridled rage, unbridled power, hatred go awry. Because the consequence of that kind of misbehavior leaves scars. It leaves scars that reverberate throughout space And with that, I think it's now important to talk about Mary and Joseph and Jesus as they fled to Egypt. Oh, Mary. Mary must have been so strong to make another journey, having after just struggled to find a place to give birth. And Joseph, too, must have questioned. Joseph must have said to himself, what had I gotten myself into? I'm sure he did. I'm sure he questioned himself when the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream once again. Dream after dream. Mary and Joseph and Jesus would have looked like any other modern-day family we see today, fleeing an oppressive regime or war zone. When the angel appeared to them, they must have grabbed everything they had that they could get their hands on and fled in the night to the Egyptian border, not knowing what was going to happen next. Well, of course, travel back then, it's not like it was today. There still must have been a considerable amount of uncertainty. And there's much to this story that we're never told. Were there soldiers in Egypt who questioned why they had come? Who knew? Because Mary and Joseph might have been spies. I wonder if people thought that more riffraff had come to town. I mean, those people from the north have a reputation of causing trouble and being up to no good. Who knows what went through the minds of people as Mary and Joseph came across into a foreign land. Perhaps people's hearts were filled with compassion. I like to think so. That they were filled with compassion as they saw a young mother and the father fleeing for their lives with a child in their arms. But I guess it's up to us to fill in the blanks of what happened during that time in Egypt. And it allows us to play out what kind of moral choice we would make if we were in the Egyptians' shoes. The decision of whether or not we help those people who are fleeing from danger, or do we let them sleep in the streets or in the shadowy parts of town because we can't be bothered to help people who are not our own. Going back to the illustration from The Godfather, like I said before, there are portions of both Herod's story and Mary and Joseph and Jesus' story that come together. Because if we were to crack open the stone of Herod, what would we find? We would probably find a stone that's dry. If we were to crack open the stone of the Egyptians as they saw Mary and Joseph, what would we find on the inside there? Would we find stones that have been dried or stones that have soaked up all the water? It's something to think about as we come close to the end of another year. A year that has been filled with both highs and lows and everything in between. What would we find, though, if we were to crack open the stones that represent our own hearts and souls, though? Because that is the more important question. Would we find that the life-giving essence of God has filled them? And you know what kind of life-giving essence I'm talking about. It's not just the love, hope, peace, and joy that we celebrated this Advent, but it is lifting up the poor. It's the parts in Scripture in the Old Testament when the prophets talk about welcoming the stranger. It's the part of all of Jesus' teaching where it tells us to love our neighbor as ourselves. If we crack open the stones that represent our hearts and our souls, what would we find? Would we find that would we find that they have been truly filled with that life-giving essence? Or perhaps even the harder part of that question is, would we discover that there's only been an outer coating that hasn't made its way deep into the makeup of who we are? These are questions that we cannot solve on one Sunday morning. But they are questions we should strive to answer on a daily basis. The King Herods of the world will surely come to pass. They'll die, they'll fade away. But who knows, one might come back. So that doesn't mean we stop in our pursuit of living lives that would risk to protect something or some people who are like Mary and Joseph, who find themselves as refugees in a foreign and unfamiliar land. Because in showing our ability to be more Christ-like, more God-like, we may find that our dry stones are filled with life-giving water. And we may then too also, we might be reminded that God who was made flesh is still with us. That God who was made flesh is still walking beside us as we make our way through the world, rubbing, pushing, fighting against our own Herods and our own Pontius Pilates. And as we do that good and faithful work, as we do the hard work of searching and longing for what it means to be filled with the life-giving essence of God, may our souls find time to be renewed. May our souls be filled with a refreshing newness of life that comes from God, so that our stones may be filled, and so that our stones may be dry. Our next hymn is number 22, Angels from the Realm. So, friends, may we now perhaps practice wetting our dry stones a bit by extending the peace of our Lord Jesus Christ to those who are around us, and peace be with you.
Also from you.
Dina?
My sister's boyfriend passed away a couple weeks ago. We really haven't really had time today, so
What was his name?
his name is Dan.
Rosemary?
I'd like to continue prayers for my daughter-in-law as she fights myasthenia gravis.
She's,
As she fights myasthenia gravis.
what is her name?
Anita.
Would you please join me in a word of prayer? Almighty God, we come together this day to draw closer to one another. So we, O Lord, have had time to celebrate the birth of your Son, Jesus Christ, and to remember what a gift it was to the world, that a message of healing, of fullness, of peace would be brought into the world. As we remember that gift, we hold it in tension with the knowledge that the world is not an easy place. That it's filled, it seems like too often, with hardships, with pain, with suffering. And so as we gather here this morning to be in the presence of one another, we ask that we may lift one another up. That our hearts, O Lord, may feel a little lighter, knowing that we do not walk this life alone. That we walk it with one another, offering each other strength, offering words of love and kindness, of reassurance. Assurance that as we were created to be who we are, that is more than enough. And that our love and our gifts, our talents are more than enough. More than we could ever imagine. God, on this day, as we gather to be with one another in this ongoing season of Christmas, we ask that our hearts not become numb to the world around us. That as we hear about reports of hate and violence in our neighboring county, that our hearts may be filled with the courage or the power to confront hate for what it is, that we can name it for what it is, and that our hearts may have the strength to show much more love than what hate could ever have. And that in doing so, bit by bit, we will make the world a better place, a loving place, a more peaceful place. But God, as we do that work, we also lift up prayers for Dan. And we know that his loss, O Lord, has touched the lives of those who are near and close to him. And we ask that as those who are close to him have experienced a great sense of loss, that your Spirit may dwell with them also. That through the midst of their grief and wrestling with loss, that those who are near and dear to them, O Lord, may not only just provide a shoulder to cry on, but even may just be a presence for them. And God, we also lift up on this day Anita, and we lift up, Lord, on this day, all those who are on our hearts, those who we lift up now, and the silence of our hearts. Oh Lord, as we lift them up to you, may we find that we can smile and be lifted up in the little things in life. Whether it be the sounds of children or of the birds or even the sun, that we are reminded of your great love and the gift that your Son Jesus Christ was to the entire world. And as we remember and continue to celebrate that gift, we say the prayer that your Son Jesus Christ taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Were there any announcements that people had that they would like to? No announcements. Well, you'll see that in the bulletin there is, you'll see that there are many announcements that are probably, I don't even know what to call what Kathy does, because she does so much. But you'll see that Kathy has compiled a list of ongoing and things, and I do encourage you highly that I believe it's in here. Maybe. So I do highly encourage you as we head into January to think about making time to attend at least the one planning session we have on January 30th for end of life planning. And it's something I highly encourage. And Joe Smith from the funeral home will be there to help lead it also. Just because it's something that, it's not morbid to think about it, but it is certainly one of the greatest gifts from my experience that you can give to your loved ones as you think about what your desires are for your own end-of-life care and planning. So I do highly recommend that to you. And I guess a couple other announcements that I have are that I thought we would be picking up the Bible study once again in January, but the January 9th and 16th I'll be doing a special study. I guess I was invited to do a study on the history of hymnody or hymns, music that would be taking place over in Carmel. So once I get more information on that, I will certainly share it with you. So then probably more like February. Sorry, Alan, is when we would pick up with the Bible study. Just because then the other 2 Thursdays are filled with the end of life planning. But I guess there's one more announcements. You don't have anything, Kathy?
Well, just to go there about the annual congregational meeting.
Oh, yes, thank you. Because, yes, we are Presbyterian and do everything in good and decent order, you will find that the notice of the congregational meeting is scheduled for January 26th, following well, I guess there'll be a potluck lunch, and then we will have conduct our annual meeting. So please plan on attending. At this time, though, I'd like to invite those who are helping to collect an offering to do so as we consider the things we have received from God and offer a portion. We ask that these gifts, therefore, might be used to further your work that you have called us, each and every one of us. We pray this in your most holy name.
Amen.
Our final hymn is not the one in my list in the bulletin, the change of heart. So it's going to be hymn number 38. Came upon me.
Church on the Hill is a family of faith, guided by Scripture and God's amazing grace, walking forward together in worship and prayer, serving God's children with humility and care. Come grow with us.
So friends, may we head out into the world renewed. May we go out with the hope that the Christ child has brought to us. The life, the love that the Christ child brought for all of us. So that when the moment comes and we crack open our stones, we will find that they have been changed forever by the love of God. The love that we have been called to share with all people. And may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you now and forevermore. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. Go in peace.